Hello, and welcome to Student Affairs Live, the weekly web show for student affairs professionals in higher education. This episode of Student Affairs Live is a part of the Higher Ed Live network, offering viewers direct access to the best and brightest minds in education. Live webcasts allow viewers to share knowledge and participate in discussions around the most important issues in student affairs. You can tune in to Student Affairs Live with me and my amazing co-host Tony Duty on Wednesdays. I am your host today, Heather Shea Gasser from Michigan State University, and today we are talking about the recent Supreme Court ruling granting marriage equality across the U.S. If you have a question or would like to comment on today's show, please tweet us using the @HigherEdLive handle or the hashtag. Thanks to Valerie Reska, who will once again be monitoring our back channel today on Twitter. Before we get on to the show, I need to give a quick shout out to our show's sponsors. Higher Ed Live is produced by M. Stoner, a marketing and communication firm that works with education institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. M. Stoner is offering free 30-minute print consultations this summer. Interested in having your suite of admissions or advancement materials reviewed? We are tweeting out a link now where you can learn more and sign up. Student Affairs Live is also exclusively sponsored by ACPA, College Student Educators International. ACPA's strategic partnership with Higher Ed Live calls attention to the pairing of innovative professional development delivery with the strength of a renowned professional association. ACPA publishes the Journal of College Student Development and About Campus, and has recently launched a new content delivery platform, ACPA Video On Demand. Check it out today at videos.myacpa.org. So, as everyone watching today's show is probably aware, this past Friday, on June 26, 2015, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled in favor of marriage equality in the historic case of Obergefell versus Hodges, essentially making equal marriage the law of the land. What does this decision mean for higher ed and for student affairs specifically? And how will marriage equality across all 50 states change the status of our same-gender loving, same-sex loving staff, faculty, and students on campus? And what are the implications of marriage equality at both the individual and institutional levels? So about a week before the ruling, in anticipation of this Supreme Court decision, I thought, who would I like to have a conversation about this with? And I'm beyond thrilled that all 5 of you said yes to my invitation, and deeply grateful for you giving your time today and sharing your knowledge. So first, I want each of you to introduce yourselves and then describe in a couple of words or sentence how you've been feeling since Friday's historic landmark decision. And we're going to start with Keith.
Well, good morning, Heather, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. My name is Keith Humphrey. I am Vice President for Student Affairs at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, California. I'm also a very proud past president of ACPA, College Student Educators International, having been president in 2012, 2013, and have been deeply involved in ACPA and other student affairs associations throughout my entire career. Since Friday, I have been feeling, I think the word I'm going to use is very, very content and also at peace. The news came very early in the morning in California, just as I was getting my children up from bed for school and summer camp, and I just sat and watched it on television with them and kind of had one of those deep in breaths and out breaths, and I just felt incredibly content and at peace.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Keith. Thank you for being here today. Cindi.
Hi, I'm Cindi Love, and I'm the Executive Director of ACPA, and I have been feeling a little bit like I'm in a time warp. This is work on human rights for LGBT people has been sort of a long process in my life, and I never really expected to see this happen in my lifetime. I was working for this for my children and grandchildren, and so it has felt surreal. When you introduced the show, the decision on the show a few minutes ago, I had chill bumps all over again. I was like, I'm not quite sure I'm living in this space and this time. And I know it's selfish on my part, but like Keith, I have this sense of peace that like my family is going to be okay now. And so that's wonderful. So thanks for having us.
Thanks so much for being here, Cindi. Jamie.
Good morning. So I too am excited about having this opportunity. I am Jamie Washington. I am the president of the Washington Consulting Group and co-founder of the Social Justice Training Institute, and I serve as pastor of the Unity Fellowship Church of Baltimore. And I name all of those because all of those matter in the context of this conversation, as well as being a lifetime member, professional member of ACPA. I feel like both of my colleagues who have already spoken, I was in a moment of shock and also great excitement. I did not expect this to be the outcome given where the country has moved, but I am still amazed at the work that we've done over these years really mattering and seeing this shift happen in this way. I am also a bit cautious right now around what this means for same gender loving folks who really are might take the legislative decision or might take this court decision as the answer. And I'm not so convinced that there's not still a great deal of work to do.
Yeah. So, yes, here. We are definitely going to dig into that today. I think many of us, all of us on the call, share that sentiment. Paulette, welcome.
Hello, everyone. My name is Paulette Dalpes. I'm the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs at the City University of New York. And I am absolutely delighted to be here with people that I love and adore, so I feel like I'm amongst family as we speak. And I am absolutely elated about this decision, and I'm very aware that it's part of a historic event, and to experience that in my lifetime and to feel the full breadth of equality as it pertains to the issue of marriage and my relationship and the relationship of other members of the queer community, it's quite an amazing experience. And at the same time, I'm also aware and very cognizant of the fact that marriage equality is only one issue for us in our community, and actually marriage equality, as it's been determined in this legislation, provides equal rights only for some members of our community and not all of our community, which I know we'll talk about later in the show. And then I also recognize, and I believe it's absolutely no coincidence whatsoever, that this announcement came on the very day as our president and many across the nation paid last respects to a leader in the African American community in the state legislature of South Carolina and the Black church. And it's a great reminder to me that, as it's been said before, that my oppression is linked with the oppression of others. And none of us are free until all of us are free.
Yeah, Paulette, thank you for sharing that. Definitely agree with you that there were those two things are cosmically linked in our memory of that day. Kathy, welcome.
Thank you. And Paulette, you had me crying again. I'm Kathy Obear, the President of Alliance for Change Consulting and Coaching, and also a co-founder of Social Justice Training Institute. And what an honor to join friends and colleagues this morning. And Friday morning, I was anticipating what would happen. I was starting day 2 of a social justice leadership training at Colorado State University. And just a couple of us were there getting ready, and then one of the participants, who I think identifies as genderqueer, got a text. It was the first one, and showed me, and I literally, as I'm doing right now, shaking, I had to sit down, which is, if you know me, doesn't happen often. And I started crying when I called Paulette and just, here's what's going on. And I called a couple other chosen family members, was Facebooking all morning because folks were in a lot of small groups intentionally, not because of this, and so I was just filled with joy, celebrating. And then I noticed about mid-morning, I also wanted to hold all that was also happening in the world, particularly as Paulette talked about our president, his eulogy, and the scores of folks across gender identity, sexuality have been murdered, killed, brutalized these last few months. So, and then by afternoon, to be honest, I was still feeling high, but I was so focused on what I was doing, it had almost taken a back seat. And so watching the news, watching other people celebrate, I am present with celebrating, but also wanting us all to hold the both and, to renew, recenter, and then keep working on everything else that needs to be done with a renewed commitment to breadth and intersecting issues. So just over the moon, can't believe it happened in my lifetime, and what's next?
Yeah. Yeah, I join you all in your sentiments. I was actually on the phone with my co-host, Tony Duty, right as the decision happened. I'm like, Tony, we got to hold this conversation for a second. It's a historic occasion, and everyone who believes in equality joins us in celebrating this, but also thinking about what's next. So thank you for allowing us to be, Student Affairs Live, Higher Ed Live, to be a part of the conversation today. So many of you who are watching today know that Kathy and Paulette are married. You've been together for 29 years, married twice in 2 different states to each other, officiated by Jamie. So this is truly family on the show today. Can you talk a little bit about what this means on a personal level for you now that marriage is the law of the land? We'll start with Kathy and Paulette, and then we'll move to the rest of you because I know you all are partnerships. So, Kathy, you want to start?
Sure. You know, when we were married in 2005, I had no idea the impact I would feel. Literally, as Paulette and I were walking down the stairs, and I don't know, 150 or so family friends were standing, turned, looked at us, and I was just overwhelmed with emotion. I had no idea how many layers of internalized homophobia were literally lifted, I believe, by God at that moment. I didn't appreciate the critical impact of recognition by community, by family, and legal recognition. I had no idea. And so that's what I hope for all folks who do choose and have the capacity to get married, if that's what they want, is to realize the freedom, the recognition, and that we all can have this deep layer of healing of the internalized homophobia that comes with this. And for me personally, I realized I'm renewed. 2 weeks ago at SJTI, I entered feeling so despair, just like I did after the Ferguson non-indictment. I was back in a space. And after Friday, I have more energy as I'm listening to issues, as I see more folks look at intersection, I have more energy. And so that's what I wish for all folks, whether they choose to marry and or celebrating this moment, be a part of history as we continue.
Paulette?
Your turn.
Well, as you mentioned, Kath and I have been together for 29 years. 30 years ago, this very summer, I spent a great deal of time in a therapist's office trying to come to terms with my attraction to women. And I had absorbed all of the negative messages and horrible ideas about what it meant to be a lesbian and to be gay in our society. And I thought I'd never be married. I thought I'd never have children. I thought I'd never lead what I had defined at the time as a normal life. And a year later, I fell in love. And I'm very grateful for that experience in so many ways. But I think the power of that process was that I came out to my parents, and they struggled to accept me. And they, in fact, disowned me for a period of time. And looking back, I can vividly recall the experiences of alienation and pain and rejection and despair. And I know that today there are members of our community that still feel that way. And I'm very, very much in touch with that pain and that experience. And yet, it's very important to recognize the process that we've gone through over these last 30 years and to recognize that it does get better. And I think my life is the experience and example of that. I think Keith's life and his parenting, which I know he'll talk about later, is a powerful example of that. I think Jamie's life and Cindy's life as well, as you'll hear later. And yet, at the very same time, it's amazing and astonishing to me that it's taken 30 years to get access to a basic human life. I mean, a basic human right to just recognize our love and the legality of our relationship. And so I hold those as a both and. How ridiculous that it's taken so long, 50, 100 of years to recognize our love, and yet at the same time, in my lifetime, how far things have come.
Cindi, Keith, Jamie, I know each of you are also married or in long-term partnerships, and I'd love to hear your perspectives on this. What does this mean for you? Cindi, do you want to start?
Sure. So Sue and I have been together 35 years. We were married legally in British Columbia July 29th, 2005. I'm a pastor also like Jamie, so I had the privilege of marrying my kids. And there's an interesting piece of that for me around marriage. It's interesting to marry your kids when you can't marry your partner. And I'm still sort of processing that out. So Sue and I raised our 2 biological children, Joshua and Hannah, together. We really never expected, as I said, to be married in our lifetime legally. We had the same surreal experience that Kathy described when we actually had that opportunity in British Columbia. Like, we just can't believe this is happening. And I had to bring my divorce decree from my original marriage to my kid's dad to demonstrate that I was legally divorced, and then sign these papers to get married. And I had this internal just quiver over that idea that I'd actually been in these shoes before, and what did that mean. And so it's fascinating to process all of that. But I remember one of the most challenging things for us at that time was we were legally married in British Columbia. We were celebrating with all of our friends and family. And then we walked back across the border in the U.S., and we were no longer married. In the country where we were born, where we were citizens, where we pay taxes, where our children were born, we literally had a right one moment, and the next moment we didn't have it. And Sue cried. And I don't know about the rest of you, but you know, when my partner cries, I'm like, I have to do something about this because I'm a rescuer. So I was like, okay, I have to fix this somehow. We have to not walk across a border again in a country. But in fact, we did. We traveled worldwide, and in many countries, our marriage in British Columbia was recognized legally when it was not recognized in the United States. So this affirmation by the Supreme Court, to me, brings down one wall. There are many others. It just brings down one. But if we can, I love that quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson, that every wall is a door. If we can interpret this as one door that has been opened that teaches us then how to open another one for other people in other places, then I celebrate this in spite of the deficiencies for people in current day. I think the last thing that I would just say is that, you know, for us, I don't want any more children in this country to grow up in a system that in any way infers that they are not equal to every other citizen. And I don't know how we pull that off, but I can look at all of us on camera and know that at least the remainder of our lifetimes, we have the opportunity to push that forward for them, and that's what I'm hoping we get to do together.
I agree. As a parent myself, agree. Jamie.
Yeah, so Sam, my partner and I, Sam and I have been together for almost 10 years. And so this decision, as I think about this personally, so as Cindi named, I'm a pastor, and I spend a lot of time in premarital counseling with folks. And so I know this is probably unpopular for pastors to say, but I have all kinds of issues with the institution of marriage. And so, you know, I don't, you know, some days I think, yeah, and some days I think, oh, not so much. And at the same time as I say that, I feel like everyone who desires to be married should have the right to be married. And so it's exciting to me. On a personal note, one of the things that I navigated when I came to the knowing that I was a same gender loving person at the age of 13, marriage died for me. And so it was one of the things at that point that I knew or believed, given where we were, that this is what it means. This is what you will lose if you are going to walk in your truth. And so it did. And I grieved it, I let it go, and I figured out how to create relationships that mattered to me at the same level of significance without the recognition of the state. So for me, marriage is something that is still very beautiful. I don't know that I will ever actually have a marriage ceremony, but I don't know that I won't. So I'm not opposed to it, but I don't need it because actually my relationships have mattered and have been already valued by the God of my understanding. So I don't necessarily need it. It's the other legal things that it brings that does matter, but because it died, I don't have the same kind of need for that in the same way.
Thanks, Jamie. Keith.
Well, I know I won't have a ceremony, Jamie, because my husband Brett does not want one. He does not want all of that level of attention. We got married August 5th, 2013, just at down the road from the courthouse here in San Luis Obispo, about 8 months after we moved to California. We've been together about 13 years. So for us, we actually struggled about whether we should legally get married because our relationship was defined by us and by our community that loves us and supports us. At the end of the day, we made the decision to actually go and do the papers and everything for our children. We're very fortunate to have adopted 2 beautiful boys when we lived in Arizona. And the privilege of getting married allowed us to go about the legal process of changing some injustices that I think were done to my boys when we first adopted. In Arizona, only I was able to be the adoptive parent and do all of the legal papers. And so while the judge was gracious enough in Arizona to unofficially let Brett sit at the table with me at both adoptions and off the record acknowledge that he was an equal partner with me in adoption, he couldn't legally be a parent at that time. And so by getting married here in California almost 2 years ago, we were able to begin the process of Brett legally adopting both of his sons and have completed that now. And so Friday is really for me about my kids, and it's about the power for all the other people who have children or want to have children around the country.
So as Keith alludes to, and definitely this is a personal issue, but it also comes with many different public rights, and at the state level and at the national level. And while the overturning of DOMA in 2013 provided the federal rights, 37 states that had made marriage legal, those with states like Michigan, where I'm at, didn't have the benefit of those state rights. So in each of your opinions, what is the most critical or central human right that is gained by making marriage equality the right of the land? And I'll go back to Keith on this one first.
Well, I'm not a constitutional scholar, so but I'm gonna say really it was the right to share your heart and love and life with whoever that is that you choose, and not to have that regulated by anyone.
Right. Cindi? Oh, you have to unmute, sorry.
I think it's that part of the Universal Declaration that simply affirms legitimacy of relationships worldwide. I think that's the key to this for me.
Great. Kathy?
I'm hoping that all this publicity and focus will help everyone realize that there were over 1,100 federal statutory laws, who knows how many state, that were denied us in same-sex relationships. And DOMA may have shifted some of that, but to realize that now everyone has access, and it may help create a foundation for people to stand on that, knowing and demand and confront if and when people, because of their bias, prejudice, or systemic oppression, try to deny and not honor the law of the land. The ones that seem most critical to me this morning are those in our most intimate and frightening times. So when our spouse or children or the family members are sick or dying, or when they're engaging the legal system in whichever part of it, when we're trying to do custody, adoption, or other family-related issues. While many of those don't directly impact me today, I'm well aware that many, many more people in our communities, those are priceless, precious rights now that hopefully more and more allies and accomplices will recognize and create systems so that we don't have to fight anymore. It just is the way the fabric of the world works.
Yeah, definitely. Jamie?
I absolutely agree with Kathleen, and that's where I would enter. I really do think the biggest concerns for me, as I have watched again back in my pastoral role, what happens at marriage, what happens at death, what happens in illnesses, and what can be dismissed and taken away at some of the most painful times with our children and with other family members, with your livelihood, with your home. If family members don't acknowledge and recognize, and we don't have the legal arm to stand on. So those are the things that I think really make a big difference in terms of what has just happened.
Yeah. Paulette?
I think as a final comment to join with my colleagues, I would add that the concept of marriage in our society, both legally and socially constructed, is a very odd concept. Mm-hmm. And all of these rights and privileges are associated with it that I'm not quite sure I agree with. And one of the pieces that I just learned, because I'm trying to do further research, is, for example, people with disabilities who are receiving SSI benefits, if they get married, they actually experience a 25% reduction in their SSI benefits once they're married. And that just doesn't make any sense to me. And so I think I would like to have a further conversation, another webinar, Heather, to talk a little bit about this whole concept of marriage and maybe whose rights are actually lost when we engage in this legislation.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's always follow-up conversations, and I think every show I'd love to have a second, part 2, part 3. So in addition to the individual level, the individual rights, marriage equality also impacts organizations and groups, and this show is specifically talking about what it means for higher education. Paulette, as the Deputy Vice Chancellor, I hope I got your title right, of the CUNY system, can you talk a little bit about what this means for higher education broadly and for student affairs specifically?
I think it's a very exciting time in many ways, and also in some ways old news. I think we've been talking about this issue for a long time, and I think that students relate to this issue in some ways and don't relate to it in other ways. And I think a couple of things that come to mind, first off, is I want to mention a little bit about some of the work that community colleges have been doing for years. And Cindi and I actually talked about this the other day. She has experience at community college, as I have experience with community colleges that were 10, 15 years ago looking at issues around transgender inclusion and other issues around LGBTQA inclusion. And so I think in some ways our higher education institutions are beyond this and are looking at other ways that they need to advance equity with our queer community. And yet at other times we still have some ways to go. There are many of us staff professionals who have been excluded from benefits for years as a result of policies. I know when I was first hired in a professional position, Kath and I had been together for over 10 years in a particular position I was hired, and a straight woman down the hall got married that year, and she immediately got a whole bunch of benefits that I never had access to. For years, as Kath has been a professional independent consultant, we've had to find ways to cover her health insurance costs, or when she did finally get included in my health insurance, I actually was taxed for that benefit and had to pay taxes on it. So there are some shifts and changes that institutions are going to have to look at in terms of their policies of inclusion and how they cover the needs of their LGBTQIA students, staff, and faculty. And I also think that our religious higher education institutions are going to have to pay attention and sort out what all this means for them. I know that there's an increasing concern that they might lose some federal subsidies and support if they do not abide by these rules, and yet I know that sometimes this law does not coincide with their religious foundations. So I think those are some critical issues. And then finally, I would throw in the concept that one of the areas we need to continue to grow and learn about and advance is in our areas of athletics. And there's a tremendous amount of homophobia in sport, and we see this play out quietly and also not so quietly on our campuses and within our teams. And I think that we have a long way to go to build inclusion in that particular area on our campuses.
Great, thanks. So speaking on that, and we got several questions in advance of the show, and we've actually been getting several questions as the show has been going on. So Keith, I'd like to kind of give you a two-parter, because one of the questions I got in advance is, what does this mean for religiously affiliated institutions, and what are the implications for those types of institutions? And then we had a great question from Brian Proffer that asks about, what about working within states that don't protect, despite the ruling? So, we've all heard on the news some of the ways that some of our states are seeking to address this or choosing to address this. So, can you kind of cover both of those?
I will do my best. I think it's the answer is that it's murky at best. Oftentimes when the court issues a landmark decision like this, there's so many downstream changes that need to be made. I read an article on Saturday about what this means for religiously affiliated institutions, and are there exemptions or are there not? And so I don't think that there's clarity on that. I think for public institutions, it really brings about equal pay for equal work, like Paulette said, through the management of benefits. I think it also helps promote the movement of professionals around the country. I can, for myself, I only job searched 2 years ago in states where it would protect my relationship, protect my family, and opportunities are now more open to me. Not that I'm not interested in leaving the beautiful state of California, but who knows what that could mean. There's definitely a little more clarity on the public institution side, not as much on the private institution side. And I'm lost the second part of your question, Heather. So
it's more about how when we have states that are choosing to not uphold the Supreme Court decision, so institutions within those states, or student affairs professionals who are working at institutions within states like Alabama and other places.
Well, I think that again, there's a lot of policy changes and things that need to happen. Lots of my colleagues around the country are ready for change and want to see things implemented right away. And institutions need to get calibrated, but I think that we probably will see a secondary set of lawsuits come, as a result of institutions or organizations not upholding this decision. Having been a plaintiff in a lawsuit against the governor of Arizona when I worked in Arizona for denying, removing healthcare benefits from same-sex registered domestic partners, I can see changes like that being made by very creative legislatures, and would hope that my colleagues around the country were in the same place of love and support that I was in Arizona, to take my power and privilege and advocate and lead a lawsuit on behalf of those who couldn't share their voice.
All right. So Cindi, before you came to ACPA, you worked with Soulforce, and obviously there's some interconnections here. Can you comment a little bit on this question as well?
Yes, I think Justice Roberts addressed this. He said really he was quite concerned about how all of these issues would get resolved by the court when, for example, a religious college provides married student housing only to opposite-sex married couples, or a religious adoption agency declines to place children with same sex. And he said there's little doubt these and similar questions will soon be before this court, and we know that will happen. I'm from Texas, and they're already at the court steps on all of these issues. But at Soulforce, our idea was not that people needed to be regulated or legislated into doing the right thing for people, but rather that we had to find a way to get all of our institutions to center around the principle of human dignity rather than human rights. and that human dignity arises out of every religious tradition, major tradition. And if we could get people to think in those terms and have a space where they could have constructive dialogue, what we call the common patch of ground, that then we could get to a place where people could be safe on religious institutions who identify as LGBTQ. I'm actually anticipating some backlash at some institutions. I'm a fourth-generation graduate of Abilene Christian University in Abilene, Texas, and this is a place that only eliminated ex-gay therapy as a requirement for student conduct disorder if you came out as gay last year. Wow. It only permitted dancing without expulsion last year. So I just want to give context. This is also a very regionalized issue, and a lot of us are going to enjoy a lot of freedoms in some places that other people aren't. So we have to be aware that we have to still stay at the front edge of advocacy and activism and education around these issues. As I said, it opens a door, but there are a lot of more doors we need to go through.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And Kathy, we in our prep for the show, we spent a lot of time talking about that this isn't the end, right? So marriage equality doesn't mean that discrimination based on sexual orientation for housing or employment has also been outlawed, or for gender identity has been outlawed. And then in the larger context, it doesn't negate anti-LGBTQIA microaggressions, any real or perceived discrimination that is occurring, and the institutional oppression and violence against members of the community. So what do you think the next step is, and how do we address some of these climate issues that still exist on our campuses?
How long do we have?
I know.
Well, the first question I want to ask people to ask on all their campuses is, what would the federal government or colleges, universities do if staff, administrators, faculty, students were not working to uphold the law and campus policies around race, disability, gender, sexual, so if they were violating civil rights and legal issues around other issues, what would happen? And I would want the same thing, if not more, to happen, because our campuses are nowhere where they need to be around other issues. But that would be a first step. I hope this widespread publicity and popularity will increase everyone's commitment to look at the broader intersecting issues that not only address LGBTQ folks across all intersecting identities, but other issues. And that we use this as a renewed opportunity to look at a climate audit, to have people really institutionally assess what are our current programs, policies, services doing to support the academic success, the retention, promotion, graduation, students, staff, faculty across all issues, particularly lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. My fear is when we say LGBTQ, I know I can quickly think gender identity is added on, and yet what I know is too many folks who have my identities, white, somewhere on the cisgender continuum, I'm masculine center, but white, cisgender, upper middle class, or privileged by education folks, now that marriage has been, it's law of the land, many of my group will back off and say my issues are taken care of, but it's critical that we go this wave of momentum and really work together to identify what are the gaps that still need change and continuous improvement. Looking at hiring, promotion, tenure, academic advising, career counseling, medical, health services, counseling, veterans, athletes, rec sports, Greek life, we could keep going. Taking a close look at residents' life, not only housing and bathrooms across campus, but interactions, because microaggressions happen when individuals with implicit bias or explicit bias think they can still act on that. And so we have so many people in so many positions of power, hierarchically as well as socially identified groups, that can still act on their bias. So without clear accountability, clear competency establishment, clear training, we will not make much progress, because there will be pockets of progress, but incredible pockets of micro and macro aggressions. And I do want to also say that a fear of mine is that because we now have marriage equality, some policies that have supported domestic partnership for same and other sex relationships could get wiped out. And that could be done out of part of the backlash and mean-spirited, or they might say it's out of finances, when in truth it costs so little money to support. But I believe all human beings deserve these rights, and until we get there, at least we can have domestic partnership along with marriage equality. I can't stress enough that we all have to re-up our vigilance and resilience as we double down to truly make sure all issues intersectionality, particularly folks that are queer, trans, of color. The issues are on the table, as well as all others, as we move forward with this energy momentum.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I think we're all, nodding and agreeing with you, Kathy, and I think it's no surprise actually that this show kind of comes on the heels of the week ago show where I was talking about undocumented students, and that's another kind of whole area, right? So Jamie, Kathy raised a lot of issues, but specifically in the areas of trans inclusion and gender justice, racial justice, undocumented students. And that we've been kind of increasingly highlighting these with urgency in our nation in recent months. Does this kind of ending one chapter open capacity for us to turn our attention to other issues? And then can you talk just broadly about how addressing one area of oppression benefits all others?
Well, again, back to what Kathy has named as we talk about the intersections. Our ability also to be able to step aside and to drill down specifically looking at specific issues. And so how does some of this, what does this mean for trans-identified folks? What does it mean for folks of color? What does it mean for undocumented folks? And that I think that we can always and should always be engaging the intersections, but our focus, just like this is focused on all LGBT, same-sex, same-gender connections and marriage, that we have to be able to spend the time looking at, again, not only how one is connected to the other, but also specifically what it means for a given population. Does it open the door? It absolutely opens the door for us to be able to move forward. But as Kathy already named, sometimes because it feels like my issue has been addressed and I haven't had to look at other issues, then we might back off, or we might not give the same kind of energy or attention, or might not even know that it matters differently, and that we wrap LGBTQ together, that we assume that that means one particular thing, and don't even recognize how, because same-sex marriage is the law of the land now, that it doesn't mean the same thing for all, for some of our trans folks. It doesn't mean the same thing for our undocumented. It doesn't mean the same thing for immigrants. All of those things are very, very real and need our attention. So I think that, yes, the door is open, and I think most importantly, those of us who maybe do feel like our work has taken a huge step forward, we really need to be the ones partnering and collaborating and listening with others to share what we learned, and to be on the forefront as really collaborators and allies in this next part of the plan.
All right, thanks, Jamie. So Cindi, speaking about your professional work with ACPA, can you talk a little bit about how ACPA is or has responded, and then what role you feel professional associations in higher education should play in helping to clarify policies and promoting best practices around equity and inclusion? Hope you're still on mute, sorry.
Yeah. I think everything that Kathy named and that Jamie just named, all of those things that are happening between people and between groups, the association has the opportunity to highlight and to really bring that into a position of thought leadership in the field, to amplify the voices of people who have access to those best practices, and then mobilize people around specific actions on campuses that can be taken as best practices. I interviewed a young man this week who's the only trans-identified, he identifies as genderqueer person on his campus who is in a student affairs staff position. And he feels quite isolated in the midst of all of this. And so I think, the other thing that we have the opportunity to do is we bring people a lot of times together in a large community of thought and practice and interaction who are by themselves on campuses. And so there's that support piece as well as advocacy. Over the last 12 months, which is the time I've been here at least, I can say that ACPA has taken a very public position on discrimination against LGBTQ persons on college campuses. We programmed our keynote speakers at convention this last time in Tampa to represent underrepresented populations intentionally: trans-identified, young men of color, undocumented students, students with differently abled challenges, and religious minorities in our predominantly Christian-influenced campus environments. We launched a Leadership Pathways project, which Kathy serves on, this last year, to try and identify barriers, real and perceived, for people coming into leadership through the association. Launched the Racism in Academy series on ACPA Video on Demand. The trans series is getting ready to come up. And then I think for me, probably one of the most important things is when we screwed up, which we did, again and again, as associations do, we looked at that, what did we do, owned it, and tried to figure out how to go forward. And I think the history of associations in higher education is often to behave as if we don't make mistakes, or to find the right spin on the front end and just make everybody feel good. And what I love about ACPA is, you know, everybody's at the table mixing it up, and when we screw up, we say, gosh, that did not go well. Let's figure out how to do that better. And that's the work I've seen us deeply engaged in this last year, and I really appreciate all of my colleagues here who've supported that process at ACPA, and hope that we'll continue to do that.
Thanks, Cindy. So, Paulette, thinking about students in particular, our work, you know, centers around their success. We have many supports on our campuses, resource centers, student organizations, etc. Talk a little bit about, you know, the relevance of this issue to students, you know, how this changes the status of student organizations and their work from your perspective.
I think we're done. Right? There's more work to do. We're finished, right? Okay, we're good. Now, I really appreciate what Cindy said, and I want to say that I was actually going to say something along those lines. One of my favorite things that I've heard people say recently is, before you knew, you didn't know. And I've been around long enough to remember that our gay and lesbian organizations had a very difficult time figuring out whether or not to include the bisexuals. Big fights about that. And just because we're G or we're L or we're B doesn't mean that we get the T. And what I really love about Cindy's message and the message of my colleagues is we still have so much more to learn. There's so much more we have to grow. And in terms of our students, which is the essence of who we are and our work, they still don't know a lot. And we need to remember that, I think, on a regular basis, and with gentleness and an open heart, continue to engage and help our students understand why this legislation is critical, why it's valuable and important, and to also support our queer community of students that are coming to the campuses, hopefully re-energized, hopefully more hopeful, and are, you know, ready to take new opportunities for leadership. I think I'm always about, what are we representing on our campuses? Who holds positions of leadership? Who has voices at the table? Who gets access to power and information and to be able to develop policies? And how are we inclusive around all of our student leadership opportunities to really be able to involve all of our students, the breadth of who we are as a college and a university? And I think it's really critical to recognize that the interconnections between legal recognition and social recognition matter. And so social recognition that will continue to grow as a result of this law, and we need to earnestly change the experience of our future generations and what's possible for them. And I think, in a very real sense, this legislation saves lives. And we know without a doubt that our youth are taking their life because they can't imagine living a life as a gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender individual, and that's not okay. And so there's still a lot of work to do. We still have a powerful message that we have to get across. This is one really small brick in the path to equality and freedom. And I know that our campuses get that. I know the passion is out there, and I know that there's incredible work that's already happening. And it'll be exciting as our next session to really talk about some of the best practices and what are the exciting efforts that are happening on the campuses.
Awesome. So Keith, in addition to campus-based organizations, for the last 10 plus years, marriage equality has dominated our news cycle. It's dominated the public attention, resources, and time of LGBT organizations. Mm-hmm. So what is next? I mean, I got a message in my inbox from the HRC the other day. The fight is not over. Yep. What is next?
I think that statement's correct. The fight is not over. We've talked throughout the last hour. This is one issue of equality that's been obtained. We talk about LGBT organizations. There is much to do to support our trans community. One of my boys identifies as female, and I'm pretty certain we have a lot of work to do to make sure that his life is of equal value to everyone else's. There's employment issues. I think we as a LGBT community need not take this privilege that we've just been granted and take it for granted, so that we can use our principles of equality and love and human dignity to really bring about equal rights for others, not just ourselves. There's so much more work to do for LGBT organizations, that there's a lot to come, and a lot of power in that.
So as Keith said, in the last hour we have covered a lot, and I hope everybody who's watching today, we've had a really active back channel on Twitter, is inspired and ready to continue work. I'm grateful to all of you, and I'd like to end with each of you offering a final thought from the show and what you'd like to say to conclude today's episode on Student Affairs Live. So Jamie, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so thank you so much, and it is honoring to have been a part of this, very honoring to have had my colleagues remind us of the bittersweet last Friday. And so that's so important to me. I think that we cannot take for granted that because we've made achievements around one issue, that there aren't other issues intersecting that continue. And so for me, I still carry what this means for the Black community, what this means for Christian communities. And it is big. There is a lot of things that we will still very much need to pay attention to in some very different ways, given those intersections. My hope is that we will slow ourselves down enough to celebrate, absolutely, all of the great work and the shoulders that we stand on, and not forget the fights that went before us, but also that we recognize that this does not mean the same thing for everybody, and that we will listen to hear how this shows up differently in different communities.
Thank you, Jamie. Paulette.
I think largely because of the beautiful man that just spoke before me, and because of other Black men in my life, I have always identified more strongly along the issues of race than I have around LGBT issues. And that's often odd for someone who's part of a target group to name, but I've always been more connected around race issues and my dominant identity as a white person, in terms of sorting out social justice and advancing that message. And so I think that, building off of what Jamie said, it's really important to know that just because you're part of this community doesn't mean that this is your passion and this is your work in life. There might be other ways that you advance social justice, and that's okay. We all have our paths and all have our journey. And I celebrate all of us and all the incredible work that has gone before to make this day possible in this law, the law of the land.
Thanks, Paulette. Kathy.
Well, listening to everyone has been fabulous, and especially just now Jamie and Paulette. I've changed my closing thoughts. What I am passionate about is having all of us do our own internalized work and then our work in groups. Because we can be all excited right now and let's work in coalition, but until we work the racism and LGBT organizations, the classism, the gender identity oppression, the Islamophobia, the religious oppression, the classism. I could keep going on disability oppression until we work our own individual dynamics of internalized and marginalized oppression, and with others, we will not come together, collaborate in meaningful ways to continue to dismantle. And I want to celebrate, but I really feel charged to continue the work that millions are doing, so we have millions more ready to join this dismantling effort and mobilize to create the future we envision. And thank you, Heather, for leading and organizing. Woo.
Thank you. Thank you. Keith?
Heather, I definitely want to echo the comments of all of my colleagues before me. I think it's important that we pause and recognize that there are hundreds of thousands or millions of folks who, around the world, who don't have this right. I think we should also recognize there's lots of people in our country who have passed on that have never had this opportunity. And so while this is a moment of celebration, it's also a moment of sorrow. And how are we using this to inspire greater levels of equality for everyone in our world?
Well said. Cindi? Oh, unmute.
Yep, I'm having trouble. Well, I echo everything that everyone has said. The truth is, I'm really grateful this week that my family is safer. That's a selfish place for us. I've received what I need, but I actually believe that receiving what I need obligates me to invest in the lives of people who have not yet received what they need. And we have college campuses all over this country who do not have gender accommodating restrooms for students, nor gender accommodating housing for students. You know, if we don't do anything else but walk over to the director of housing and res and say, let's start this conversation, that's something each one of us can do. But I am mindful at the end of this conversation that we are still viewing this from a U.S.-centric place. And we have members all over the world, and many are watching this show today. So I think it's important to say it is still true in 72 nations around the world that an LGBTQ identified person who's openly out can be arrested and imprisoned for a minimum of 14 or more years, or killed in an extrajudicial killing without any reporting whatsoever for being openly LGBTQ. So they're not so worried about marriage, and so they're worried about staying alive. So I hope we take this uptick of faith and renewed belief in our democratic system here that has given us this gift to challenge ourselves to be examples both through our internal work and our work as a community to the rest of the world. And Heather, thank you so much for doing this. It's a fabulous experience for all of us, so thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I am so grateful to the 5 of you for joining Student Affairs Live today to have this conversation. It was a phenomenal episode. Thanks also to our program sponsors, including ACPA. And I just want to give a quick shout out to next week's show. My co-host, Tony Duty, will be here on July 8th, next Wednesday, with Charlie Nutt, the Executive Director of NACADA, talking about trends in academic advising. And you can receive reminders about this and all of the other great shows by subscribing to the Higher Ed Live newsletter, or you can browse our archives at higheredlive.com for free content, as well as potentially subscribe to our iTunes podcast. You can listen while you commute, and all of our past episodes are available for you for free. So I am Heather Shea Gasser. Thanks again to everybody who is watching and engaging on the back channel. I just want to say a shout out to all of the 5 of you. Make it a great week. Thanks, everyone.